And less than 2 hours from now, President Biden will formally ask Congress for a major new aid package to help Ukraine. The dollar amount has not been revealed, but NBC News has learned it is designed to cover military, economic, and humanitarian assistance for the next 5 months. We'll go live to the White House momentarily for reporting on if and when that package might get through both the House and the Senate. It comes on the same day the head of NATO said members of the alliance have pledged and provided more than $8 billion in Ukrainian military aid so far. And this morning, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, retired four-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis, told us just how much the United States has done to keep Ukraine in the fight and how this new aid package can continue to help tip the scales.
It's an enormous step. And really, if you look back to, say, World War II, and you look at what the United States was doing for a very beleaguered, a very encircled United Kingdom, this is really beginning to hit those levels. And in fact, we're hearing historical echoes, as you know, Joe, of the Lend-Lease program, which was kind of the cornerstone of what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did for Winston Churchill. We are in that same mode here with our friends in Ukraine, and I think the stakes are equally high. So we can do this. Let's also recall from those days, once you get the arsenal of democracy, as it's been called, our ability to produce real combat capability, once you get it rolling, watch out. And so, A, we can do this. B, it's the right thing to do. And back to our dear mutual friend, Madeleine Albright, one of the last conversations I had with her early in this year was talking about NATO and the NATO role in all of this. You know, Madeleine effectively wrote the strategic plan for NATO in 2010. Go back and read it. It holds up pretty well. And she said even then, before the invasion, in the end, this is going to be about our ability to put weapons in the hands of Ukrainians. Prescient comment. We're doing it right. It's the right thing to do. Sometimes Americans feel as though, well, the Russians and NATO are roughly equally armed. Could not be further from the truth. The Russian entire defense budget is $70 billion. The defense budget of the United States alone is 10 times that, well over $700 billion. The Russians have 5,000 combat aircraft. NATO has 28,000 combat aircraft. Russia has essentially a handful of capable ships, maybe 100. NATO has 700. And by the way, scratch one of the Russian ships, its flagship, the Moskva. So point being, Joe, it's not just the industrial might, it's what exists today. All of that augurs very well for a sudden clarification in the Russian mind. But here's the problem. The problem is Vladimir Putin. He's so personally invested, he's so deeply angry, and he still has other weapons at his disposal, chemical weapons, God forbid, nuclear weapons. I think the latter extremely unlikely, the former not out of the range of the imagination, and he could use cyber as a very significant capability. So you're showing his face now. He's an angry, bitter, frustrated man who's personally invested in that. I'm not sure he's toting up the score in industrial capability and budgets, but we need to do everything we can to make it clear to him he cannot win this foot race.
A portion of our conversation earlier this morning with retired Admiral James Stavridis. Along with the request for new aid, President Biden also is sending a proposal to enhance the U.S. government's ability to go after Russian oligarchs and government figures. The White House says it would establish new authorities for the Justice and Treasury Departments to seize oligarch assets and prevent them from evading sanctions. It also would make it easier for the United States government to in turn use those assets to help Ukraine. Joining us now, Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker, and retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. He is a former commanding general of the United States Army in Europe, now the Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Good morning to you both. General Hodges, I begin with you and the new posture that we've seen in just the last few days from Defense Secretary Austin, talking about a weakened Russian military so it can't project its strength and military power into countries that surround it. What do you make of that stepped up rhetoric, and what's your analysis this morning of how this sort of renewed, refocused invasion just focused on the East is going for Russia right now?
Willie, thanks. Well, first of all, how powerful when you see America's top diplomat and America's top security official going in tandem by train to Kyiv to meet with President Zelensky and Secretary Blinken saying we're going to get our diplomats back into Ukraine. This is so important. And we talk about now we finally have a nomination for a confirmed ambassador to go into Ukraine. That's just as important as delivering howitzers. And then the terminology used by Secretary Austin to say we are in this to help Ukraine win, and then to lay out that winning means total restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty, that is so powerful. And of course, it reflects a maturation of the thinking by the White House and our allies on what this is all about. It wasn't that long ago we were arguing about whether or not to provide Stinger. Now, in a short amount of time, the administration, I think, has gotten it right. Can we deliver? The Russians, of course, the noise coming out of the Kremlin, they are extremely unhappy about this because they know what that means. This disparity and capability that Admiral Stavridis just talked about is going to be very, very evident for everybody to see. And you're starting to see, Germany now providing armored vehicles. This is what American leadership delivers.
Peter Baker, it was not so long ago in our early careers that people would say that politics stops at the water's edge, and believed it. Hasn't been that way for a very long time. We saw that briefly after September 11th. But we do see a far more unified Washington, D.C. Administration officials are talking about it. Republicans are talking about it. And I'm just curious, your newspaper, the New York Times, this morning talking about Vladimir Putin once again threatening the possibility of nuclear war if the United States continues to humiliate him on the battlefield. Do you see any cracks in that bipartisan support for an aggressive approach towards Russia's invasion? Or are Republicans and Democrats still, for the most part, standing shoulder to shoulder against Putin?
Yeah, no, I think it's holding firm. I think the criticism you'll hear from President Biden's opponents is he's not doing enough. But broadly speaking, there is a consensus in Washington among Democrats and Republicans, most Republicans anyway, that there's no choice but to stand up to Putin in this instance, that Putin has given them no choice, that there's not exactly an out for us either. And I think that, they're worried, obviously, about threats of nuclear force. I talked yesterday with, some senior people at the Pentagon. They think that obviously that's something to worry about, that they haven't seen any signs, though, that there's any actual, preparatory kind of work that you would do for that kind of thing. You can't obviously keep track of tactical nuclear weapons the way they can strategic nuclear weapons. But for the most part, while they're watching this carefully, they don't think that's something that Putin is on the verge of doing at this moment. But you never know. And that's, of course, the danger of this thing, an escalatory cycle where you get, into the point where suddenly you're at a full-scale war with Russia. And to the general's point, yes, that's, and I think to Admiral Stavridis' point, we outnumber them in equipment and capacity. But that doesn't mean they can't do enormous damage. And that what they're counting on is an American public and a Western European public that doesn't want war and that will eventually restrain the political forces from going too far. But so far, for the most part, Joe, I think you're right that Democrats and Republicans largely stand together right now in Washington on this.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, General. This is an interesting switch for the United States from the Cold War, when we, of course, looked at our nuclear capabilities as an offset if the Soviet Union's troops rushed into Central and Western Europe. Now, of course, it's the Russians who are being overwhelmed by conventional forces. I'm wondering at this stage, the early stages of this war, we were more concerned about Putin saber rattling and more prone to listen to his nuclear blackmail. It seems to me that most people in the Biden administration and most foreign policy officials right now are of the opinion that he's just bluffing. Let me ask you, what's your take? When you hear this from Putin, when you hear it from Lavrov, do you think it's just a bluff? Is it a sign of weakness? Or is it something we really need to be concerned about?
Well, I think what you have highlighted very well is the maturation of the administration's thinking. You remember, it wasn't that long ago, we were worried about providing stingers. Now here we are delivering armored vehicles, artillery, endless amounts of ammunition. And it's a growing realization that, yes, of course, Putin is serious. He's dangerous. He's brutal. He has not a streak of humanitarian streak in him. But I think he's not crazy. He does not want to be Nero. And I think that the idea, he knows that the advantages that the alliance has, that the United States has over Russia, are so significant. And by the way, he did a response to a nuclear employment by the Russians, whether it's a large or a small, does not have to be nuclear from our side. There are so many different things we could do that could wreck all of their financial institutions. Or this is what the F-35 was designed for. Fill the sky over Ukraine with F-35s and obliterate Russian land forces inside Ukraine.